Now, welcome to another lightning response video, where this time the question comes to us from Parth Parkesh, who he asked a rather lengthy question, so to sort of sum it up, it mainly boils down to expressing his excitement for the upcoming James Mangold Star Wars film that will, of course, explore the origins of the Jedi Order and how and why he thinks this is, or has a good chance to be, the best, most successful of the three films announced at Star Wars Celebration back in April. And though certainly there's a lot of potential for this film, I actually think of the three films announced at Celebration that in many ways, or for many reasons, this is the one I'm the most skeptical about, starting with the odds of it actually getting made. I mean, as I think we all know at this point, the past few years with Lucasfilm and announcing new projects, and especially new films, has basically been a comedy of errors. They keep either getting canceled or just never ever mentioned again, or when they are brought up or when Kennedy or someone is asked about them, she'll essentially say something along the lines of, "It'll be made someday when the stars align." And so I think, again, of the three announced at Celebration, the James Mangold film is the least likely to come to fruition. I think the Dave Filoni movie, which will be this sort of culmination of the Mandoverse time period, I think that absolutely gets made. It's by far the most popular time period right now, and will undoubtedly have Grogu in it to draw in a big audience. And even if the Ahsoka series is bad or just in general fails or no one watches it, and this will of course be Dave Filoni's first real live action test all on his own, well, I think the Mandoverse film still happens, though maybe with Filoni getting a bit more help with it, shall we say? Or in other words, a little less freedom with it, that he'll be a bit more micromanaged, which will probably lead to something worse than if they would have just left him alone. Then there's the Rey movie, and for better or worse, I think they find a way to get this one made no matter what as well. I think after they paraded Daisy Ridley out on stage at Celebration, that they really don't want to go back on this one now. I think if it ends up failing to get made, they're also going to face backlash, that there'll be those in the media and in the fandom crying they ultimately caved in and listened to the haters and the trolls, the ones who don't like Rey, and that's why they didn't make the film, because they're catering to them now. Though another reason why I absolutely think it gets made is because it's almost certainly a Kathleen Kennedy pet project or pushed by her, and as long as she is at the helm of Lucasfilm, I think this film will set sail, though maybe into an iceberg at the box office. But then the question becomes, what if she's not at the helm or is fired in the not too distant future? And yeah, this has been rumored and speculated upon for years at this point, and yet Kennedy endures. But some, once again, are speculating, and I think it does make sense for what it's worth, that if the, interestingly enough, James Mangold written and directed Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, if that's a failure, and early reviews have not been kind to this film, and so if it does fail, it could finally be the end of the line for Kennedy. And if she gets fired because of a failure of that film, because of a James Mangold directed film, well, I really couldn't see the next president of Lucasfilm being all too eager to let Mangold do another film for Lucasfilm, not after he got the last president fired. And even if the new Indiana Jones film is a relative bust or failure at the box office and Kennedy doesn't get fired, I don't know that she'd be all too eager to trust him with another one of Lucasfilm's properties, and pretty much the only one they've got going for him right now. And look, I'm not saying I have absolutely no confidence in James Mangold. He directed one of my favorite films of all time, which is also arguably one of the greatest superhero movies ever made, that being Logan. And if you haven't seen it, you should go watch it like right now. Not to mention he also has some other good films on his resume. It's not like he has a long list of terrible movies. He's actually a pretty good writer and director, in my opinion. And so there's every chance he could deliver a fantastic Star Wars film if eventually given the chance, as he's been promised, even if again the early reviews of the Indiana Jones film say it isn't the best. However, all that said, personally, I don't know that I'm super excited or interested in a Dawn of the Jedi movie or a movie that explores the origins of the Jedi. I mean, that's completely fine if others are. We don't all have to want or look forward to the same things, and I respect anyone, like our commenter here, who's excited for this and has high hopes. I mean, if it does indeed get made, I hope it's a terrific movie. But even though I'm someone who usually likes to know it all, I generally love diving into and getting to know all the little details on pretty much any subject, to be honest, not just Star Wars lore. But I just don't know if the origins of the Jedi is something that I want unraveled or explored by maybe anyone but George Lucas, to be honest. Especially if it's only going to be done in one film, which just doesn't feel like enough time. I would think a whole trilogy, at the very least, would be needed for what James Mangold has described as a sort of biblical story. which I think is what it should be. I think it should be a pretty big epic tale, which means perhaps this is something better suited for a long-running multi-season series, one that maybe explores multiple kind of generations or points in time to show how the Jedi come to be, or how they grow and evolve into the Jedi Order we'll eventually know, or the one they are before things go all sorts of wrong in the prequels. Plus here, I think sometimes, maybe a lot of the time, when it comes to peeking behind the curtain to get the answer to kind of big, cool questions or mysteries, well, I think your imagination, even if it's not something you haven't fully thought out or formed a vision of in your head, I think your imagination is oftentimes more interesting than the reality you get or what someone else's imagination conjures up and puts on screen or on the pages of a book or in a comic book. And speaking of that, this actually is something, The Dawn of the Jedi, that the EU explored, and it wasn't a story I was particularly fond of, or maybe I should say there were elements of it I really kind of didn't like, and others that I think did. Which is maybe a good topic for another time or another video to really dig into just what exactly is the Dawn of the Jedi series. But anyway, that isn't to say that I think the movie will have anything to do with the original origin story or the EU origin story of the Jedi. Most likely it won't. Most likely this will be a new and different take on the beginning of the Jedi. And as I've sort of theorized elsewhere, it's a film or story that will almost certainly have connections to the Rey film and the ancient Jedi books she has and will be learning from. Those books we see her take from the first Jedi Temple on Ahch-To, which will probably be seen in this Dawn of the Jedi film. I mean, it stands to reason we'll actually see those books being written, and then we will see Rey reading from the books, and there will be passages literally taken from one movie and inserted into the other to have connections. I don't see why they wouldn't do that, honestly. Which, when I really think about it, is maybe the root of the problem with this Dawn of the Jedi film for me, that I'm afraid they'll not only screw up the origins of the Jedi and do something kind of stupid or ridiculous with it, but that it then gets sort of implemented in what the Jedi become going forward or what the Jedi become under Rey. That this is all set up to make the Jedi something different from what they were and should be. And honestly, I think they'd be much, much better off just diving into the old Republic era. And I know, some will say that they should keep their hands off it so they don't screw that up too. We don't need current Lucasfilm tampering with what is such a really good time period. But honestly, the Old Republic is such a wide open timeline, and I think it's just perfect for making some really awesome, big, epic scale films, because you can go all in on the Jedi versus Sith and have huge spectacle battles, as Star Wars is famous for. But you can also have some great kind of political intrigue as well, which I know for some reason some people don't like that about the prequels, for example. But I've never really understood that. I mean, I love the original trilogy, and that it never dives into politics is fine. But if you're going to keep expanding the story, I'm eventually going to need some context to why the story is actually happening. I'm going to need a reason why they're fighting this war beyond, well, one side is bad and one side is good. So anyway, yeah, if the Dawn of the Jedi movie gets made, I certainly hope it's a masterpiece. I hope I end up loving the movie and they get the origins of the Jedi right, and then it bleeds into the Rey movie and it makes that terrific too, somehow. But before any of that can potentially happen, I really do think James Mangold and perhaps Kennedy, they have to get over the sort of hurdle that Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny might end up becoming. I also just think they'd be better off focusing more on or picking one or two time periods and going all in on them, instead of them putting shows and movies all over the timeline and just, in general, kind of confusing the more casual fan or general audience member. Well, that's all I got for you this time. Now it's your turn to dig to the comments below and tell me what you think about all this. Do you think the Dawn of the Jedi movie will get made, and do you want it to get made? Are you excited for this one? Or you can always ask a question for a future lightning response video by starting your comment off with "Hey Thor" to grab my attention. And I do think I'll be doing a Let's Talk Some Star Wars video this weekend where I try to answer a bunch of questions all at once, because some of them are really good questions but probably don't lead to a very long or elaborate response. But I'd still love to answer them and discuss them. Anyway, you know what to do. Leave your comments below. Let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.